Thank you for coming. My name's Joe Jameson. I'm with the Queen's Peace Council. I'm coordinator of the Queen's Peace Council, which is a branch of the U.S. Peace Council, which is an affiliate of the World Peace Council. And we're not the biggest section of the anti-war movement, but we're part of the biggest section of the world peace movement. So welcome to this Kefalos Society Center in Astoria, Queens. I'd like to thank the gentleman who is really a pillar of the progressive Greek community, Kostas Lourdas, who is here today. Kostas, can you take a bow? You would like to say a word or two? He secured the location tonight, and he's a great champion of all progressive causes, and I thank him sincerely for getting the place. It's a magnificent cultural center. And you want to say a word or two?
I know that we have two great speakers here tonight, and I was a bit dwarfed before your greatness. However, I will say a few things. It is an oxymoron, I can say. Is it an oxymoron or it is a provocation to call the most destructive and the most destabilizing force on the planet, NATO, the pillar of stability? Is it an insult to the human intelligence to call the most destructive power on the planet that is the force that is going to bring peace and security to the people on the planet, when history says the opposite? We've become, all these years that NATO has been in existence, witnesses of destruction, wars, and bloodshed around the planet, wherever NATO intervened. And we have Syriza in Greece, and the Prime Minister of Greece calling NATO the pillar of stability and the pillar of peace. Can we call it the pillar of stability and the pillar of peace when we've seen just a few years before in that area what they did to Yugoslavia, when they destroyed a whole country that has been divided? They have used nationalism to divide the people, and now they're using it again. And Syriza and Tsipras plays that dirty role. He's become the best laundromat to whitewash all the crimes of imperialism. That's what he's doing now. I don't want to say much, but you've seen, you have become witnesses of all these crimes of these years, and I will give I will transfer everything, to the speakers, who will elaborate on the subject, and they are the best to tell you about the crimes that NATO has committed on the planet and what is going to be done in the future, because they've said that one nationalism provokes another nationalism, and the two of them, the war. And that's what they are doing in the area, in Balkans, in the Middle East, and all over the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kostas used to be, up until very recently, the president of this cultural society, so he's responsible for this beautiful center. He's a champion of all the progressive trends in the Greek community in Queens and in New York. We're going to reverse the order which we're planning, and we'll start with Ajamu Baraka. Let me introduce him and say that he is a member of the executive board of the U.S. Peace Council. He's an internationally recognized human rights activist, organizer, and political analyst whose experience spans 4 decades of domestic and international involvement. As most of you know, he was the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party USA in 2016. I think we have more than three-party people here tonight. Currently, he serves as the national organizer for the Black Alliance for Peace, a relatively new formation, launched in April 2017 to rebuild the traditional anti-war and anti-imperialist position of the black radical tradition. Ajamu is on the leadership bodies of a number of anti-war organizations, including UNAC, United Anti-War Coalition, and the Coalition to Close All U.S. Foreign Bases. He's an editor and contributing columnist for Black Agenda Report and contributes to many publications such as Common Dreams, Dissident Voice, Counterpunch, and Black Commentator. I'll just mention, he's written quite a few books. I'll just mention two: Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi, and then Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence, and a number of others. And he frequently appears on mainstream media, CNN, BBC, Tavis Smiley Show, ABC World News, Real News Network, Washington Post, New York Times, RT, and many others. So we're honored that our local peace group has such a national or international figure. And both of our speakers, by the way, were at a UN press conference on Venezuela this morning, and I'm hoping they'll talk a little bit about that. So would you please put your hands together for Jonathan?
Thank you so much, Joe. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you this evening, especially now that I really feel that I'm in a familiar and welcoming space based on the comments from our comrade here. I know that we are thinking and seeing the world in a common way. So my remarks won't be as rough as I thought they may have been, because I think that everybody in this room is probably very familiar with many of the things I'm going to touch on for a few moments as we look at the incredible challenges we have today at this moment in history. Just a couple of quick corrections on my bio. I have a lot of chapters in books. So the two that you mentioned were chapters in books, and that books. I don't want to take the credit from anybody who is out there writing books for myself. My friends, we have a lot to do. We see that in this country there is an acceptance for war and aggression that has resulted in this state, in fact, becoming not only a rogue state, but a real threat to the collective humanity of this planet. And the only force that can put a brake on the kind of criminality we see from this state has to be the people. So this tour that I'm on right now, this effort that we are involved in, all of us here, is to try to build a more effective or more powerful anti-war and pro-peace movement here in this country. We have to do it because the moment requires that. That basically, if we don't do it here at the center of empire, then who else can do it? We have certain responsibilities because we are at the center of empire to, in fact, build a movement that will be in solidarity with the peoples of the world, but a movement that will be powerful enough to then put a real break on the kind of criminality that we see has been normalized here in this country. So, we start with this question that we raise with people as we move around this country. And I'm going to read it because it's from one of our statements we put out from the Black Alliance for Peace. We say, we pose the question to progressive forces in the U.S., how much more war How much more death and destruction will you endure before you break with the capitalist duopoly of your government and say, no more war, no more subversion, no more killings in my name by a state that by every definition has become a rogue state and a threat to global humanity? That, for me, sort of captures the mission and captures the responsibility that we have. We see today another crisis, another nation in the crosshairs of criminality, Venezuela. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion around the internal structure of Venezuela, how it governs itself, the character of the revolutionary process in that country, because for me, those questions are secondary, or really, in some ways, irrelevant when a state finds itself in the crosshairs of U.S. subversion and possible military action. Well, what we have to talk about is the fact that there seems to be a sort of a general acceptance of this kind of subversion by a majority of the population in this country. So we raise another question to people as we move around. We say, what right does the U.S. have to intervene into the internal affairs of another nation? We say that there's no objective right given or bestowed upon the U.S. by either God or a human secular force that grants the U.S. the right and the responsibility to intervene and determine the leadership of any other nation. We say that if the U.S. is really concerned about democracy and social justice, then the real focus should be on correcting this thing that they call democracy here in this country. So we've got to engage in a conversation with the American people and try to bring about some kind of degree of sanity and consistent morality. We've got to confront the mentality that supports intervention, that supports the notion that the U.S. has a right to intervene into the affairs of other countries. We have to remind the American people that there is something called international law. There is a UN charter. There are mechanisms to address situations where there is a threat to democracy or to international peace. And we have to remind people of that because we've got to move away from this unilateralism that we see that has characterized U.S. policies for the last few decades. If there are issues of social justice and human rights, any threats to the international peace, we have mechanisms in the United Nations process. We have a Security Council that theoretically is supposed to intervene to address threats to international peace. No state, no regional entity has a right to unilaterally intervene into the internal affairs of any other country. That message has to be communicated to the American people. But let's look at and try to unpack why it appears that people in this country support these kinds of interventions in Venezuela, Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. What is the justification, the rationale for supporting these kinds of interventions? And I have to say, my friends, that the rationale is really rooted in a notion of privilege that's connected to the internalization of the idea that Europeans and European Americans have rights and responsibilities that other people don't have. That they have been given the right to determine how other people live. That because of this notion of that kind of responsibility, we see that nefarious forces like the U.S. state will use a concept of humanitarian intervention to weaponize that concept, to give political cover to interventions in which they are really just trying to advance their particular agenda. But because humanitarian intervention appeals to the best instincts of the people, then the people kind of fall for it. So the U.S. is not intervening in order to steal the oil of Venezuela or to control the politics of the region. They're intervening in order to save the Venezuelan people from a dictator, to restore what they call democracy. And again, people sort of fall for it. Not just the general public, but we have a concern here that even people who call themselves, who self-identify as radicals, are also falling for that kind of okey-doke. And again, it shows the pervasiveness of this kind of white supremacist ideology that has to be rooted out. So, you know, we have a real challenge here in this country. And that's one of the reasons why we started to build this new formation, the Black Alliance for Peace. We began to build this formation in April of 2017. A few months after the change in government, we saw that we had an opportunity as a consequence of the end of the Obama administration to really begin to bring at least the black community back to a historic position that we have always had, being skeptical and in fact in opposition to the U.S. adventurism around the world. That we have not been a population that was easily tricked into providing moral support to imperialist adventures. But as a consequence of certain shifts in the population and the influence coming from the Obama years, there was a decidedly shift toward the right in the black community. One in which the traditional critical posture when it comes to the U.S. state was dissipated somewhat. So we thought it was important, now that Obama had left the scene, to try to bring the black community back in line with its historic perspectives and values. We saw this attempt to build the Black Alliance for Peace as an important part of the process of helping to revive, if you will, the broader anti-war movement here in this country. Because the black anti-war position has been a key component of the anti-war movement here in the U.S. So organizing the Black Alliance for Peace was seen and is seen as an integral part of the effort to revive and rebuild a powerful anti-war movement here in this country. We are concerned not only with U.S. adventurism, U.S. imperialism, and we use that word without any apology. Again, we believe that we've got to engage the people in honest conversation. And we also have to take back certain terms, even if we have to define what those terms mean. We say that basically the U.S. Is an imperialist state. That's the motivation for its interventions. Therefore, a proper, radical, and principled position on the part of people who are concerned about the globe, concerned about collective humanity, who have a value system that is opposed to exploitation and oppression, the proper position is to be anti-imperialist. And we don't apologize for that. So we say that not only are we anti-imperialist, we link up our opposition to imperialism to an assessment of the situation that the working class in general and black people in particular face internally in the U.S. That the militarism and violence that we see externally is just the flip side of the same coin of aggression and militarism that we see here in this country. The violence, the state violence on the part of the domestic army that we refer to as the police, the killings with impunity in this country, the mass incarceration. This reflects the war on black people and poor people taking place here in this country. So we link the two phenomena together because we understand that that phenomenon is in fact linked because we're talking about one global system. Okay? So the Black Alliance of Peace is organizing. We have been part of a number of initiatives. Bahman's going to talk about one. Costas referred to the concerns around NATO. Well, one of the new formations that we were involved in helping to organize, was a coalition to close all U.S. foreign bases. That came out of a conference in January of 2018. That then evolved to an international campaign coming out of a conference in November that we helped to organize also. That international campaign is not only looking at U.S. foreign bases, but also NATO bases. Why? Because we understand that these are the instrumentalities of imperialism. These are the mechanisms in which the U.S. imperialist state and the European imperialist states are able to project their power. So we say again, if one is anti-imperialist, if one wants to see a globe in which there's less violence and militarism, then we've got to focus our attention in our efforts on the U.S. state and its extension, its sort of partner in NATO. And we see NATO as one of those global structures of white power, white supremacy. And so we are focused in on educating people on the role of NATO and demonstrating that NATO is in fact an aggressive instrument for advancing what we refer to as the pan-European colonial capitalist white supremacist project that came out of the invasion of the Americans in 1492. Another part of the campaign that we're involved in terms of dealing with the issue of militarism is we are looking at these international basing structures by the U.S. You know, the U.S. has taken the globe and they have divided the globe into command structures. And one of the newest that they developed was the Africa Command, or we refer to as AFRICOM. It was developed, it was launched October 1st, 2008, just a couple of months before Barack Obama assumed the office of the presidency. As a consequence of this Africa Command, we've seen a almost 2,000% expansion of the U.S. military footprint in Africa. Okay, so the command brought more militarism to the African continent. During that same period, we look at a domestic program, the Department of Defense's 1033 program. How many people heard about that? This is a program administered by the Department of Defense that transfers military hardware from the military to various police forces around the country. In fact, they have been responsible for transferring something like $4.1 billion worth of military hardware to police forces. It's the program that's primarily responsible for militarizing police forces across the country. Okay? So we are organizing and educating against AFRICOM. We are organizing and educating, again, on the flip side, domestically, against the 1033 program. And we're going to launch a campaign on that on April the 4th of this year. We're also concerned about, in terms of domestic militarism, we're concerned about the role of various states in training the domestic military or the police forces. And one of the main states involved in that is, in fact, the Israeli state that's been responsible for organizing, for training a number of police forces across the country in control and containment strategies. And so we are going to put more attention on that also. So my friends, this work is important. It's important because we have to be in solidarity with people around the world who find themselves targeted by this state. It's important because as moral human beings who are concerned about exploitation and oppression, who are committed to trying to eliminate the planet, eliminate militarism and war from the planet, it's time for us to really step forward and become even more active in our opposition. You know, we want to build structures of opposition, again, because we have to at this moment in history. We have to build those structures for ourselves and for the people around the planet who are in opposition to U.S. intervention and U.S. attempts to undermine their ability for self-determination. And we recognize that in this struggle, it's not just the U.S. state that we're concerned with, it's not just NATO as an instrument, but we have identified what we refer to as the axis of domination. It's the U.S. state, the EU, and NATO together, okay? And we have to make those connections, my friends, because of the profound changes taking place in the world today, because power seems to be moving away from the U.S. and Europe to other parts of the world. We see that the response from the EU and from the U.S. using instruments like NATO, the response seems to be that instead of investment and cooperation with these emerging nations, the U.S. is in fact offering only militarism, violence, death, and destruction. So we've got to be clear about what is happening and clear about where we stand in terms of this phenomenon. So we say we have to be opposed to what we call the axis of domination. We have some activities that will help us get there. We're involved in a fight back process. The immediate fight back concerning Venezuela, for example, is that there's going to be a national mobilization in Washington on March 16th. How many people heard about that? Very good. There's going to be a national mobilization in opposition to NATO on March the 30th, also in Washington. And Bahman will talk about this in more detail later. We have the continuation of the coalition to close all U.S. foreign bases and the global campaign. We're going to invite you to be a part of that. But as I end, let me say something very, very specific. We've got to figure out how to make the issue of war and militarism a part of the national discourse and a major issue in the 2020 elections. So we have some specific things that we want to call on these politicians to embrace, if they will receive, if they would be up to receiving our support. We say that all candidates and representatives must support efforts to cut the military budget by 50% as a start, and to reallocate those resources to fully fund social programs in areas of housing, education, healthcare, green jobs, and public transportation. That makes sense to me. They must commit to passing resolutions at every level of government to bring the U.S. in alignment with international law and the United Nations Charter, and oppose all arbitrary and illegal U.S. military, economic, political interventions into the internal affairs of sovereign nations, regardless of political party controlling the office of the presidency. They need to promote the closing of the over 800 U.S. foreign military bases and ending U.S. participation in the white supremacist NATO military structure. They must call for and work to close the U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, and withdraw all U.S. military personnel from Africa. They must commit to ending the militarization of police forces through the Department of Defense 1033 program. They have to demand that the Department of Justice document and investigate all uses of lethal force against non-white populations as demanded by various human rights treaty monitoring bodies. And they must advocate that the U.S. adhere to the United Nations resolution of July 2017 that called for the elimination of all nuclear weapons globally. This should serve as a framework for our support, that if these representatives and these candidates are not prepared to embrace these kinds of ideals, to address war and militarism, then they don't deserve our support. So my friends, this is the part of the challenge we have before us. We are facing some very serious conditions, but we're up to the task. We know that we can always determine the kinds of conditions we are born into, but we can determine how we respond to those conditions. And we have decided, those of us in the Black Alliance for Peace, the U.S. Peace Council, we have decided that we're going to struggle and we're going to fight. We're going to build a new world. We can envision something that goes beyond this madness. But we understand that we can't do it by ourselves. We've got to build a powerful social movement that has the vision and the commitment to go all the way. And we have to, because our lives truly depend on that. Thank you, my friends.
Our next speaker is Bahman Azad. He's a member of the Executive Board of the U.S. Peace Council and is its organizational secretary. He's NGO representative of the World Peace Council at the UN, and he serves in many capacities. He's coordinator of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases, and he's a member of the coordinating committee of the Hands Off Syria Coalition and United National Anti-War Coalition. He's also a chair of the Iran Working Group of Veterans for Peace. Most recently, he was the main organizer of the global campaign, against U.S. NATO military bases, whose founding conference was in Dublin, Ireland, back in mid-November that some of us attended. Bahman is a professor and an author, and he's an expert on the political economy of capitalism and socialism. And I hope he will refer a little bit to the Venezuela conference this morning. And in addition to his many, many other skills, I think he is the best designer of flyers I have ever met. And he is responsible for this beautiful flyer that brought us together tonight. So will you please welcome my friend,
Thank you.
Bahman Azad.
You forgot to say on the speedster, huh? Thank you very much, and thank you, Comrade Costas, for allowing us to be here, sharing the moments with you. Our job is tremendous. The amount of problems they have put before us is unbelievable. They don't let us sit for a minute. They are pushing us every day. You think you dealt with some issue, two more is created. And it's going on and on and on. And it's really wearing out the peace movement. If you look at it, for example, we had the February 23rd, international demonstrations against U.S. intervention in Venezuela. 16 days later, or 20 days later, you have another one, March 16th. And then you have anti-NATO. And this has created a lot of problem for a lot of people. I mean, they have to make choices now. What are they going to do? Which one are they going to attend? Although they're all important for them. So what I'm going to talk about is the organizing side of it. What we can do. Ajamu laid out what is needed to be done. But the question is, how do we bring our forces together to make it possible? The enemy is so powerful and strong and deceptive that it takes a lot of minds, a lot of arms and legs to put together a resistance and a pushback. And this requires organizing a lot of people. We know in the Peace Council that no single organization or group of organizations or the left only can win this battle. We have to pull our forces together. And for that reason, I mean, this has been the principal driving force of U.S. Peace Council since its inception. But I want to outline it, lay it out in 3 basic principles that in many ways, U.S. Peace Council is the only organization in the U.S. that has all 3 features. First is what Ajamu mentioned, anti-imperialist. That is, we do not see this madness a result of some crazy guy in charge. It is a systemic problem. It's a result of growth of capitalist system, which has extended its internal competitions into the world scale, and now competing over who gets most globally. And that is going on. And trampling on everybody's rights, everybody's property, everybody's independence, sovereignty, just to get where they want to go. So it's a systemic problem. And you look at it from World War II on. Regardless of which administration, which party, you have the same exact foreign policy based on war, on domination, exploitation. And that's what they are. For resources, cheap labor, all kinds of things like that. So, anti-imperialism is one. Some organizations, Ajamu's, for example, Black Alliance for Peace, is fundamentally an anti-imperialist organization. Share that principle with the United States, with the U.S. Peace Council. Second aspect for us, which is unique to the U.S. Peace Council, is that we are structurally part of an international movement, a global movement. U.S. Peace Council is a national member organization of the World Peace Council. World Peace Council was formed immediately after World War II to put an end to that war, imperialist wars, and to nuclear arms race. That was the foundation. And I should not mention, I don't have to go through all the names, but at least 2 of them I can mention to you as founding members of the World Peace Council. One was Pablo Picasso. And this you see on his jacket, it was designed by Picasso for the Peace Council. Secondly, was Charlie Chaplin. These were the people who put together this organization, and a lot more. I mean, a lot more of similar level. And it was based on the belief, again, that imperialism is a global system. You cannot fight it locally. You have to create an international movement to oppose it. And this international feature, our linkage with the rest of the world, one organization in every country, national organization, is a part of World Peace Council. And we coordinate. We have regional meetings. We have executive committee meetings that consist of 40 nation organizations, national organizations. They come together annually and decide, analyze the world situation and come up with how we can, and they coordinate. Then we have our regional meetings. Region of the Americas, we had it recently, right? Ajamu and I went to that meeting. Cuba is the head of the regional meeting of the Americas, of the section. But there are Asian section, Asia Pacific section, European section, Middle East section, all of the areas. So we are connected. We are working together, coordinating our work the same way as imperialists are coordinating their works. And we have to do it. Thirdly, the principle that we follow. As I mentioned in the past, we need to unite to overcome in this big challenge. We cannot do it alone. The left can't do it alone. Only organized peace forces cannot do it alone. We have to bring in labor. We have to bring civil rights issues together because they are all linked. Environmental, Pentagon is the principal consumer of fossil fuels in the world, right? People think that if we start driving electric cars, we have solved the problem or change our bulbs, right? But aircraft carriers cannot run on solar, right? Jet fighters, right? They have to use this, and they're the main consumers of it. They're the main polluters in the world. This is part of, they're doing it because of their imperialist interest in dominating the world. That's how they do it. And if you are an environmentalist, you have to be anti-imperialist, right? If you are a civil rights activist, you have to be anti-imperialist. As Ajamu described it. It's the same imperialism, arming the police here and arming the dictatorial states all over the place, like Saudi Arabia, right? Selling them $10 billion worth of weapons while they're committing all those crimes in Yemen and other places, and were responsible for all the terrorist attacks. But they are allies in crime. So that's how it works. We think that we should bring our forces together, redirect or direct or orient the peace movement against imperialism in general as a system, and act internationally. That's what makes the US Peace Council and the World Peace Council. This is how we operate. It's not easy to convince some of the forces within the peace movement to understand this. I'll give you an example that triggered the whole process that we went through up to this point. When US started attacking Syria, for example. I mean, they started with Yugoslavia very clearly. I explained how they do it. But this is the story. We tried to reach out to everybody in the peace movement to say, we have to do something, right? You know what the response of many of the forces was? Both sides are bad. Assad is bad. US is bad. We don't want to take sides. That was the position. But what was this the result of? If you look at the patterns, they vilify and demonize the leaders. They started with Fidel Castro, Milosevic, right? Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, Assad, now Maduro, right? Has nothing to do with the social system of these countries. When it comes time for moving against them and taking the war over, the process starts. First with that. If they can manage to do that, they push sanctions on them, blockade the economies, to destroy the infrastructure, the strength of the country to defend itself. They never fight somebody of their own level of power. They always invade, right? That's how they do it.
Chicken shits.
Just imagine, small country like North Korea, right? Couple of nuclear weapons, they haven't dared touch it yet. Right? They have to attack the weak people, weak powers, right? Or if they're not weak, weaken them first. So demonization, sanctions, threats, and then attack. That's the process. And for us, it's surprising that why is it that people do not recognize it when it comes again? They did to Yugoslavia, we thought, okay, people had no experience on that, right? Then came Iraq, same pattern. People fell for it, right? Then came Libya, then came Syria, right? And now it's happening. If we look at the pattern, it's the same pattern, the same method that is being used. And we need to organize. We have to let people know what is going on. But our forces are limited. We need to organize. We need to get more people involved directly in organizing resistance to all these efforts and show them the linkage between the war abroad and the war at home against the people. The motivations are the same. The forces that are doing it are the same. So, when people did not respond, I mean the peace forces did not respond to serious situation to us, we immediately said, okay, we have to do something important and drastic. And we organized a delegation to Syria, peace delegation. Joe was part of it. And they met with a lot of people in Syria, and they came back with a huge report in terms of the realities of Syria. And that blew up all those defenses that both sides are bad. Okay. Now, but it was not that we were attacked seriously all over the place. A lot of things they used against us. They are a front. This peace council is a front for the Communist Party. They drank Assad's Kool-Aid. They are Putinized. That was a term used against us, right? Putinized. So we decided that, again, that was realization, we can't do it alone. We have to come together. So we asked other forces that were at least looking at it from anti-imperialist point of view to join us, right? We put together Hands Off Syria coalition, which was very successful in pushing back some of these attacks. But Syria was a limited subject. And we thought, if we can bring broader forces together. And we were thinking, in the Peace Council, because we were initiator of the delegation, we were initiators of the Hands Off Syria coalition. Based on the same principles I mentioned to you, we need to bring forces together. So we said, okay, what would bring many more forces together that they agree on? Because you cannot convince people about Assad, this and that, maybe, right? We found, okay, what is the core operating element of imperialist domination? It's their military bases all over the world, right? About 1,000 of them. About 95 to 98% of all military bases belong to US and NATO. Right? So we said, oh, this is probably the item that can bring more forces, because at least the majority of forces in the US and the world are against foreign military bases for various reasons. They don't have to be anti-imperialist. We look at it from an anti-imperialist point of view. A lot of people look at it from expense and waste of resources. People look at it as being responsible for destruction and war. Environmentalists can look at all the pollutions that the bases are causing. One example is our friend sitting in the back. In Okinawa, they're destroying nature there. Right? So all of those people, with different reasons, could join this one. And we did it. And Ajamu mentioned it. We put together a coalition against U.S. foreign military bases. We asked organization to sign its unity statement, and several thousand people and organizations joined in quickly. So we held that conference in Baltimore, Maryland last year in 2018, January. And then it was a resolution from there that we should globalize this movement. So we had a resolution to make it a global campaign against US and NATO together. Because this octopus at the center is US, but all of these arms are all these NATO countries doing the same bidding for the United States, basically. So we formed that, and we are in the process of organizing a global campaign. We are putting together the proceedings of that conference for publication. We are getting it ready. We are going to organize actions, and one of the things, of course, when you talk about NATO, this Venezuela thing is very much linked to NATO also, because since the dismantling of USSR and the socialist camp, NATO has been expanding eastward to the borders of Russia, right? Most of the former republics, and also moving toward China. It was an open decision to move 60% of U.S. naval force into China Sea to surround China, and causing a lot of problem there too, right? It is the first time, and I want to bring this to your attention because this links the whole thing together. Recently, Colombia became a global partner of NATO. Right? Colombia is acting on behalf of US and NATO to bring down the government of Venezuela. It is for the first time that NATO is expanding westward. Right? And we should put a stop to it, otherwise Latin America will be another Middle East. We have to understand that and move. And this is what we are doing. And this is why we are insisting on having big crowd on March 30th in Washington. There's a lot happening. It's 1 week of activities by various organizations. But the main rally, although NATO is celebrating its anniversary, 70th anniversary on April 4th, which is the day of assassination of Martin Luther King, by the way. And they are adding this whole crime, insult to it too, by bringing it to the United States to celebrate that. Of all places. Their headquarters is in Brussels. They have all these command centers all over the place. They bring it to Washington, D.C. This is a direct affront, right? They're doing it intentionally, in my view. We have to oppose that. And there's a lot of activity being organized around that area. We, in Washington, D.C., around the subject against NATO and all that. So what we are doing, on March 30th, because it's a weekend, it's not every 4th falls in the middle of the week. So to have a national rally, you cannot have it a weekday. So we organize it for the 30th of March, which is a Saturday. World Peace Council, every time NATO has a meeting, sets up a counter conference against it in the same city. World Peace Council is having its anti-NATO conference on Sunday in Washington, D.C., 3 to 7 p.m. Black Alliance for Peace is having an April 4 event, right? In D.C. So a lot is being organized. We have put together a coalition called No to NATO 2019.org that about 50 organizations, I would say, participating in running it, in organizing it. We have a huge steering committee. And we have a site there, No #2 NATO 2019.org. All the information about what is going on around NATO summit, NATO meeting in Washington, D.C., you can find in there in terms of each one of the individual activities that are being organized. And we're going to be communicating with people, not just through that, but the Peace Council, Black Alliance individually also, passing you the information so that we can mobilize. But I want to conclude by saying that I hope I have conveyed to you the need for organizing. An organized majority is always taken over by an organized minority. That is the problem. Imperialist forces and the dominant ruling people are the minority, but they are organized. That's how they control. We need our own organizing efforts. We need to come together. And on the basis of that, I want to invite you to join the U.S. Peace Council. Become a member of international network of peace forces. We have some informational material back there. There's also brochures for registering and joining. And U.S. Peace Council website is uspeacecouncil.org. Please go to that website. We have information. Subscribe to the site. When we update it, you get update notices that such and such article was added, posted. And that keeps you informed. You don't have to search for articles. We do a lot. We have a Facebook, again, U.S. Peace Council, facebook.com/U.S. Peace Council, which is updated every day. And we are having a tour with Ajamu, and we are honored to have him. Tomorrow it's going to be in New Jersey, New Brunswick, and on Friday it's going to be in New Haven, Connecticut. So Ajamu is having the tour, and we are continuing. So please join us. I really urge you and ask you to join our organization and become one. Thank you.